The classified files on Klaus Reinhardt's service with the U.S. Air Force weren't fully declassified until 1979. For exactly 34 years, one of the most extraordinary prisoner of war stories of World War II remained buried in military archives. Why the secrecy? Partly because the technical intelligence Reinhardt provided remained classified for decades, but partly because the story challenged comfortable narratives about good and evil, about loyalty and betrayal, about who could be trusted and who could not. The story begins March 1945 in the skies over Belgium. Klaus Reinhardt sat in the cockpit of his Focke-Wulf 190, instruments flickering as the engine coughed black smoke. He was Germany's most experienced test pilot, having evaluated every major Luftwaffe fighter and bomber since 1941. Below him stretched the contested territory near Bastogne, American armored divisions pushing east through winter mud. The engine sputtered again. He knew what was coming. Complete failure in approximately 4 minutes, maybe less. Standard protocol demanded he attempt to reach German lines, but Reinhardt made a different calculation that day. Reinhardt could have tried to glide back to German lines. He could have attempted a belly landing in friendly territory or even bailed out over areas controlled by Wehrmacht forces. Instead, he chose to land his aircraft behind American lines. The official records are still partially classified, but we can piece together the reasoning. Reinhardt later claimed he was concerned about civilian casualties if he attempted an emergency landing in a German town or city. The Americans, he reasoned, would at least follow the Geneva Convention. When American armored forces reached the crash site near Bastogne, they found something extraordinary. A nearly intact German test aircraft and alive in the cockpit, one of the Luftwaffe's most experienced test pilots. Standard protocol was clear. Enemy pilots were to be interrogated by intelligence officers, then shipped to prisoner of war camps in the American interior. The questioning usually lasted a few days at most. But when intelligence officers realized who they'd captured, everything changed. This wasn't just another down pilot. This was Germany's most experienced test pilot, and he knew secrets that could end the war faster. When Major Thomas Bradford first interviewed the German pilot, he realized immediately that this wasn't just another downed fighter jockey. Bradford himself was a test pilot, one of America's most experienced. He'd been evaluating captured German aircraft at Eglin Field since 1943, trying to understand how German aviation technology compared to American designs. And here sitting across from him was perhaps the only man alive who'd actually test-flown all those German aircraft Bradford had been studying. The initial interrogation was supposed to last 72 hours. It stretched to 21 days. Bradford later described those sessions as some of the most fascinating conversations of his military career. Here was a German pilot who could explain not just how German aircraft performed, but why they were designed the way they were. He could describe the thinking behind German aviation doctrine, the trade-off German engineers had made, the problems they tried to solve. The Americans' response shocked everyone, including Reinhardt himself. And that's when Bradford got an idea that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. What if he asked his superiors, instead of just asking Reinhardt about German aircraft, we let him evaluate our planes? The response was immediate and predictable. Absolutely not. The security implications were enormous. American aircraft designs were classified. Having an enemy pilot fly American planes would violate every security protocol in the book. But Bradford persisted. The debate went all the way to the War Department. It took exactly 23 days before a decision came down from Washington. His demands were simple but telling. First, he would not fly any mission that could directly harm German forces. Second, his evaluations would be honest and professional. Third, when the war ended, he wanted help immigrating to the United States. After heated War Department debates, the impossible decision came down. March 28, 1945. Eglin Field, Florida. Klaus Reinhardt walks across the tarmac toward a Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, the aircraft that more than any other had devastated German industry. The irony wasn't lost on anyone watching. The B-17 had been designed specifically to carry the war deep into German territory. It was B-17S that had destroyed German factories and cities. Now, a German test pilot was about to evaluate the very weapon that had helped defeat his nation. But for Reinhardt, walking toward that aircraft was like approaching a work of art. Everything about the flying fortress impressed him, starting with the ground crews preparing it for flight. German aircraft maintenance in 1945 was often slapdash, hampered by parts shortages and undertrained personnel. Here he saw American ground crews who were meticulous, professional, working with equipment that was clean, well-maintained, and obviously built to last. His first flight lasted 2 hours. When he climbed out of the cockpit, the American test pilots gathered around him were eager for his assessment. Reinhardt's response was characteristically direct. "Your engineers have solved problems we didn't even know we had. But what the War Department kept secret for 34 years will shock you." Reinhardt's engine failure wasn't an accident. Declassified Luftwaffe maintenance records from 1979 reveal he deliberately sabotaged his own aircraft. This wasn't a capture, it was a calculated defection, and the Americans knew it from day one. Over the following weeks, Reinhardt would test fly virtually every frontline American bomber and fighter. The B-24 Liberator, the P-47 Thunderbolt, even early versions of the P-80 Shooting Star jet fighter. Each flight was monitored, each evaluation recorded and classified. What Reinhardt revealed next stunned American test pilots. When evaluating the P-47 Thunderbolt, he immediately identified why German pilots had struggled against it. "German fighters are built for short-range interception," he explained. "We assumed American pilots would fight the same way, but you've built aircraft for endurance, for long missions deep in enemy territory. Your pilots can stay and fight when our pilots must return to base." What Reinhardt told them next made War Department officials question everything they knew about German capabilities. "You don't just build better aircraft," Reinhardt told Bradford after a month of test flights. "You build aircraft better. The attention to detail, the consistency of production. This is why you're winning the war." American test pilots began to understand their own aircraft strengths in ways they never had before. But what Reinhardt discovered about American aviation capabilities would terrify German high command if they had known. What he found in those American cockpits wasn't just superior engineering. It was proof that Germany never had a chance of winning this war. And the Americans were about to learn secrets that would change everything about how they fought future conflicts. But there was more. They also began to understand German weaknesses that had been invisible from the American side. But the real story wasn't what Reinhardt told the Americans about German aviation. It was what he discovered about himself when he started flying for the enemy. What happened next would haunt him for the rest of his life. But here's what makes this story truly incredible. Something the classified files revealed decades later. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this entire story wasn't the technical intelligence Reinhardt provided. It was the relationships that developed between former enemies who found themselves working together. Major Bradford later wrote extensively about his friendship with Reinhardt. "I had been prepared to deal with a Nazi fanatic," he recalled. "Instead, I found myself working with a consummate professional who approached every flight with the same dedication I tried to bring to my own work." The American pilots at Eglin Field initially viewed Reinhardt with suspicion. This was understandable. Just months earlier, he'd been part of the military machine trying to kill them. But as they worked together, professional respect began to develop. For his part, Reinhardt was experiencing his own revelation about his former enemies. Nazi propaganda had portrayed Americans as soft, undisciplined, inferior soldiers. But the pilots and engineers he worked with at Eglin Field were clearly neither soft nor undisciplined. "I had been told that Americans were technically inferior," Reinhardt wrote in his post-war memoirs. "But the aircraft I flew, the instruments I used, the engineering I saw, all of it was superior to what I had known in Germany." It was a humbling experience. Bradford became not just a colleague, but something approaching a friend. They would spend hours discussing not just aircraft performance, but the philosophy of flight testing, the future of aviation, even their hopes for the post-war world. This psychological contradiction would soon resolve itself on May 8, 1945, when Germany officially surrendered. May 8, 1945, VE Day, victory in Europe. For Klaus Reinhardt, the day brought mixed emotions. His nation had been defeated, his former comrades were now prisoners or dead, and he was thousands of miles from home working for the enemy. Yet standing on the tarmac at Eglin Field that day, watching American pilots celebrate, Reinhardt felt something unexpected. Relief. The war was over. No more cities would burn. No more pilots would die. And for him personally, a path forward had opened. The work continued. With Germany defeated, Reinhardt's role shifted from wartime intelligence asset to post-war technical consultant. His insights into combat tactics were incorporated into training programs that prepared American pilots for the challenges they would face in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. But here's the bombshell the War Department buried for 3 decades. Information so sensitive they classified it above top secret. The Reinhardt program wasn't just about one German pilot. It was the blueprint for Operation Paperclip, and it involved over 200 German aviation experts. Reinhardt was just the test case. The program that brought Reinhardt to Eglin Field was part of a larger operation called Paperclip, the American effort to recruit German scientists and engineers for the post-war world. While Paperclip is often remembered for controversial figures like rocket scientist Wernher von Braun, the aviation specialists like Reinhardt were arguably just as valuable. Reinhardt himself became something of a legend in aviation circles. After returning to Germany, he continued working as a test pilot and aviation consultant well into the 1970s. He flew virtually every major aircraft developed in the post-war era from both sides of the Iron Curtain. Bradford, who remained friends with Reinhardt until the German pilot's death in 1997, put it differently. Klaus showed us that professional competence and personal integrity transcend national boundaries. Even in the middle of the most destructive war in human history, it was possible for former enemies to work together toward common goals. This raises the obvious question: was Reinhardt a traitor or a professional doing what he thought was right? The answer isn't simple, but the declassified files reveal something that changes how we should judge his decision. Consider what both sides gained from this arrangement. The Americans got invaluable intelligence about German aviation technology and tactics, but they also got something more: a deeper understanding of their own aircraft's capabilities seen through the eyes of someone who'd been trying to defeat them. Reinhardt gained something too. He got the chance to survive the war and build a new career in the post-war world. But more than that, he got to continue doing what he loved, testing aircraft and advancing the science of flight rather than rotting in a prisoner of war camp. Perhaps the most important lesson of this story is that even in the most polarized conflicts, there are usually individuals on both sides who can recognize shared interests and common ground. The classified files on Klaus Reinhardt's service with the U.S. Air Force weren't fully declassified until 1979. For exactly 34 years, one of the most extraordinary prisoner of war stories of World War II remained buried in military archives. Why the secrecy? Partly because the technical intelligence Reinhardt provided remained classified for decades, but partly because the story challenged comfortable narratives about good and evil, about loyalty and betrayal, about who could be trusted and who could not. Reinhardt's story reminds us that history is rarely as simple as we'd like it to be. Real human beings are more complex than the categories we use to divide them. Professional competence, personal integrity, and shared expertise can create bonds that transcend political boundaries. Today, Klaus Reinhardt is remembered in aviation museums on both sides of the Atlantic. In Germany, he's honored as one of the greatest test pilots of the 20th century. In the United States, he's remembered as a valuable contributor to American aviation development during the critical early years of the Cold War. In a world that often seems divided by insurmountable differences, Klaus Reinhardt's story offers hope that professional respect and human decency can sometimes triumph over the forces that seek to divide us. Here's my question for the veterans and history buffs watching. If you were in Reinhardt's position, captured your country losing, offered a chance to use your skills for former enemies, what would you do? And for those who served, have you ever found professional respect with someone who was supposed to be your enemy? Drop your thoughts below. I read every comment, and the best discussions often become future video topics. If this story fascinated you, need to hear what happened to the German submarine captain who saved American prisoners. That story was classified even longer.